This is one of my favorite topics that I've covered in the past. New house stories in which unsuspecting people who just moved into their new homes discover something or perhaps someone that shouldn't be there. But before getting into those, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. DraftKings is an online, real money casino that lets you play whenever and wherever legally permitted. Choose from over 300 real money games, slots, blackjack, roulette, and live dealer games. With more real money games added regularly, DraftKings Casino is changing the game with new ways to play. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable, and if it's not yet available in your state, check out DraftKings Daily Fantasy app, where you have a shot at winning cash prizes all season long. Head to the DraftKings Casino app right now and sign up using promo code Mr. Nightmare, and when you play just $10, you'll instantly receive $100 in casino credits. This happened a few years ago, but it still gives me an unsettling feeling whenever I think about it. The only reason I'm talking about it now is because I feel like it's been long enough since it happened, and I won't risk anything by putting it on the internet. Back then, my wife and I had just moved into the suburbs from the city. We'd just had our third kid, and between the baby stuff, the toys, and the general chaos, our apartment felt way too cramped. We found a nice house in a quiet, safe neighborhood. The neighbors described it as the kind of place where you'd feel fine leaving the doors unlocked. The house itself wasn't massive, but it was definitely a step up from the tiny space we'd previously been living in. One of the features that caught my wife's eye was the backyard. It had this beautiful, slightly overgrown garden with a few old statues scattered around. They were weathered, a little eerie looking, like something out of Game of Thrones. I know it sounds weird, but my wife and I loved it, said it gave our yard character. I was pretty indifferent, so I left everything as it was, statues and all. I figured it was less work for me, which I was never going to complain about. A few days after we moved in, I was looking out the window, taking in the yard, when I noticed something odd. One of the statues, an angel I think, was facing away from the house. All the others were facing toward us, so it looked strange. I could have sworn they all faced the same direction, but I didn't really know for sure. I didn't think much of it, and just assumed I was misremembering things. The next morning, I looked out the window again, and that's when I noticed it. Another statue had turned around, again facing away from the house. This time I knew something was up. I had never been more sure about anything in my life. I asked my wife about it, but she just shrugged it off and said she hadn't noticed anything. I thought maybe it was my son Jimmy. He was a little prankster back then, always up to something. But when I asked him, he just looked at me like I was nuts. I doubted he'd do something like that anyway. I knew something was going on though, but I couldn't prove it. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I tried to ignore it. Besides, I had bigger problems to worry about. I don't like admitting it, but money was really tight during that time, and I lived in perpetual fear that I was going to lose my job. A few days went by without anything strange, and I started to relax. But then, one evening, I looked out the window, and my heart nearly stopped. All of the statues were lined up in a row at the very edge of the house, just standing there. It was a freakish sight, like something out of a horror movie. I know it sounds ridiculous, but part of me could feel all those eyes looking at me. My breathing went shallow. I couldn't decide whether it was more scary or bizarre. I went outside to get a closer look, trying to make sense of it. Before opening up the back door, I took a few nervous glances around the yard to make sure there was no one out there. It was daylight, but I was paranoid. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open the door and go inspect the statues. I went to lift one of them and immediately realized something. Those statues were heavy, way too heavy for one person to move alone. I couldn't even budge one of them on my own. As I was debating what to do, my wife came outside, and the look on her face told me she was just as freaked out as I was. She suggested maybe some of the other neighbors were messing with us, trying to scare the new people on the block, but that explanation literally made no sense. We had met all of the neighbors, and they all seemed like fairly normal people. Plus, I had trouble believing that anyone sane would do this to a family with young children. This was harassment, not some harmless prank. We ended up calling the police, but as you might expect, they couldn't do much. They suggested putting up some security cameras, but we didn't have the money for that. I told the cops we would, but on the inside, I was really reluctant to do something so drastic. They left, and I guess I felt a little better, even though my wife was still extremely shaken up. My wife and I did everything we could to hide the situation from our kids. Say what you will, but we didn't want to scare them. Nothing happened the next day, or the next. I speculated that the cops had scared whoever was there away, which did track on many levels. So we tried to forget about it, even though neither of us really felt comfortable. I tried to assure myself that maybe my wife was right. Maybe it had just been a prank or something. That didn't do anything to calm my nerves, though. I was on edge, looking out the windows every time I passed by, half expecting to see the statues somewhere else. I hope no one ever has to experience the sensation of feeling unsafe in your own home. A few days passed without incident. I started thinking the nightmare was over, and for the first time in a while, the house was actually starting to feel like home. I could not have been more wrong. It was a weekend. I don't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday, but it was definitely a weekend since my kids didn't have school. After some breakfast, I went outside to play in the yard with my kids, and that's when I saw it. Spray painted in big black letters on the back wall of our house were the words, "Go away." I nearly dropped my son when I saw it. Without thinking, I rushed my kids inside and told my wife to stay in the house with them. I don't know what came over me. I'm not that brave of a guy, but I started sprinting through the garden, screaming threats at whoever had vandalized my house. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, and I was looking for a fight. No one was anywhere in my yard, though. Eventually, I gave up looking. As I was walking back towards the house, the adrenaline in me turned to outright fear. This was serious. Someone had left a direct message meant to scare us. They could have meant us harm, and I knew the situation was only going to escalate from there. The police came again and took down another report, but without any leads, there wasn't much they could do. I insisted that they stay on the property in case those people came back, but they told me they didn't have enough evidence to waste resources like that. As far as they knew, some teenage delinquents could have been behind the graffiti. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They told me they'd make sure a patrol officer was nearby, which I guess was some kind of consolation. My wife was twice as upset as I was, so I reassured her that we'd be okay, even though I was freaking out internally. That night, I was in the kitchen when I heard my wife scream from the living room. I ran in, and she was standing by the window pointing outside. I looked, and my stomach dropped. There were 5 people standing in our backyard, each of them wearing white face coverings. They were dancing around in this strange, jerky way, almost like puppets. We just stood there, watching them, too shocked to move. It was terrifying. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, but it was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. I snapped out of my haze and grabbed the biggest kitchen knife we had. I basically screamed at my wife to call the police, and while she was doing that, I ran out the back door with a knife in my hand. I screamed like a clinically insane person and took one step toward them before instantly regretting it. There were 5 of them and 1 of me. They could have been armed. Before anything else could happen, I turned and ran back inside the house like a coward. The knife must have scared them though, because they stopped dancing and ran into the garden, out of sight. I told my wife to run upstairs, find the kids, and hide, and I guarded the back door in case they tried to break in. By the time the police arrived, those people were gone. The police did a thorough search but couldn't find any trace of them. That was the last straw. I didn't care about the cost. I bought and installed security cameras the next day. My wife was hysterical for weeks after that, begging me to let us move somewhere else. I told her that if one more thing happens, that we would, but that we'd probably be screwing ourselves financially if it came to that. Luckily, the cameras must have done the trick, because those people never returned, and we never had another incident occur on the property. The scariest thing, though, is that we still live in the same house, and never got an explanation for what happened. My wife Taylor and I recently moved out of our old home. She didn't like being so close to her family and wanted to put some distance between us and them, so that's what we did. We don't have kids, and she stopped working ages ago, so she was relatively amenable to my suggestions about where to move. I'm an electrician, so bouncing around isn't much of a problem for me. We eventually settled on New Mexico. We've both been rural people all our lives, so it wasn't that drastic of a lifestyle change. That was about 3 months ago, give or take. We found a fantastic deal on a place way out in the country. The house is honestly bigger than we really need, especially since it's just the two of us and our black lab Lola. But honestly, we figured we'd make use out of the extra space, maybe even host some of the friends we'd make. We'd been settled in for a few months when I started noticing something odd. The upstairs lights kept tripping circuits, but the rest of the house would still have power. After this happened once or twice, I knew exactly what the problem was. Like I said, I'm literally an electrician, so this kind of stuff is my bread and butter. I figured it would be an easy fix, just a matter of rearranging some of the load on the breaker, which in all likelihood was downstairs. Times like those make me happy that I'm the type of guy who knows how to fix things. To be honest, I hadn't spent that much time in the basement since we moved in. I didn't really have a reason to. We'd looked it over briefly when the realtor showed us the place, but I didn't pay much attention. Come to think of it, I don't think I'd been in there one time since then. Anyway, I walked down the stairs and started looking around for the main breaker. The basement was pretty cluttered and definitely not the type of space that could be easily used. It looked more like a storage room than a basement. Eventually, I figured out where the main was and started futzing around. After about 10 minutes, I realized where the load imbalance was and told myself I'd rewire it when I had more time. At that point, I was about to go upstairs when curiosity got the better of me. I figured since I was down in the basement already, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have a look around. After all, this is my house, and it was honestly a little strange that I didn't know every square inch of it. Like I said, most of it was filled with old furniture and a bunch of junk. There wasn't anything particularly interesting down there, and I eventually concluded that trying to transform it into a usable space would be way too much of a hassle. That's when I noticed something odd. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old wooden chairs, was a large metal door. It was strange because this wasn't just any door. It looked industrial grade. It was also a lot taller than most normal doors would be, and seemed pretty thick too. I walked over to it, and my suspicions were confirmed. It looked like the type of door you'd see securing a walk-in safe or some kind of panic room. My first thought was maybe it was a tornado shelter or storm room or something, but that would be a weird surprise. You'd think the realtor would have mentioned a feature like that. I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. It was locked. I immediately went upstairs and started rummaging through the drawer of keys the previous owner had left behind in case we locked ourselves out or something, but none of them worked on the door. I must have tried like 15 keys or something, but no luck. I eventually told Taylor about it, and she was just as curious about it as I was. I'm still not sure how, but she worked her magic, and we were able to get in contact with the previous owners. It was that exact phone call that took me from curious about the situation to downright concerned. They were a little odd on the phone and would pause every so often, like they were thinking carefully about what they were saying or trying not to say too much. Part of me wishes I had recorded the conversation, but hindsight is 20/20. When I asked about the door, they got quiet. Eventually, the wife said it was just a safe room in case of a tornado. I told her that was great, but we were unable to use it since it was locked. After another pause, she claimed they'd lost the key and told us to just ignore it. I thought that was extremely unlikely, since they had literally left us keys to random doors that we'd probably never need to lock. The way she said it gave me a really bad feeling in my gut too, but there was nothing I could do. We ended up hanging up almost immediately after that, as they were definitely not trying to make small talk. Taylor tried to laugh it off, told me I was overthinking it, but I couldn't let it go. Over the course of the next few weeks, I would occasionally wander down the stairs and just stare at that door, wondering what could be inside. I tried everything I could think of to open it, even some tricks I'd picked up from work, but it was no use. The lock was solid. I ended up giving up for about a week, but the curiosity ultimately got the better of me. Fast forward to 2 days ago, when things took a wild turn. After my wife's wishes, I decided to hire a locksmith. He came over, and I let him do his thing down there. After about 30 minutes, I went downstairs to check on him. He told me that the lock was unusually complex for a simple panic room. Those were his exact words. I was worried he wouldn't be able to get it open, but to my surprise, he actually managed to crack it after another half hour. I wish he hadn't. Inside, the room was set up like some kind of shrine. There were old black and white photographs on the walls, all covered in strange symbols that I didn't recognize. In the center was a chair, just facing the wall. It looked like someone had spent a lot of time sitting there, just staring at nothing. In one corner, there was a cot with crumpled blankets, and it smelled stale and kind of gross. Then I noticed the trash. Empty chip bags, crumpled water bottles. The realization smacked me in the face. Someone had actually been staying down there, and not that long ago. I was dumbfounded. I didn't think the situation could get much worse, but of course, that's what happened. As I was trying to take it all in, I noticed a second door on the far right side of the room. It was small and half hidden by the minimal light, but it was there. I opened it and realized it led to a set of stairs that led to the cellar door outside the house. I felt like such an idiot. I hadn't even had the foresight to check the cellar door when we moved in, since I just assumed it led to the basement. In all the time we'd lived here, I had never even opened it. My bewilderment at the whole thing soon became terror. Someone had literally been living in my house for who knows how long. Things started clicking in my brain. Since moving in, my wife and I had noticed a few weird things that we couldn't explain. Most of the time it was just things going missing. Until that point, I had just assumed my wife had misplaced things, which she did have a tendency to do. This discovery changed everything though. Someone had been living in our house. I had to repeat that thought a dozen times in my head before I could fully wrap my mind around what was going on. I didn't know who had been in there or why, but I knew I didn't want them coming back. I tried calling the previous owners, demanding an explanation, maybe even threatening legal action, but they wouldn't pick up. Either they disconnected their number or they just didn't want to deal with it. Taylor was freaked out, and I was too. That night, I took some heavy furniture and barricaded the cellar door from the inside. I found a heavy-duty looking chain and padlocked it shut for good measure. I didn't care what it took. There was no way I was letting someone sneak back in through that door. The police came and took down a full report before leaving, telling us they'd do their best to try and get in contact with the previous owners. We even called our realtor, who was horrified and said she'd assist the police in any way she could. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, we heard it. There was a loud bang on the front door. Lola shot up, barking like crazy, and we both froze. Neither of us moved, just staring at each other, listening. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, but then we heard small rocks tapping against our bedroom window. Taylor held on to Lola, and I went to look out the window. Taylor begged me not to, but I was furious at that point. In my mind, I was preparing to fight whoever was out there. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed and yanked the curtains away from the window, but I couldn't see a thing. We thought it was over. Taylor wanted me to call the police, but there was a little part of me that wanted to handle this myself. I knew the police would scare them away and call it pettiness, but I wanted to make sure whoever was out there got caught. I told her if one more thing happened, I'd call. But then from downstairs, I heard the sound of glass shattering. I sprinted downstairs just in time to see two figures running away from the house. The kitchen window was completely shattered. It was then that I called the police, who showed up not long after. They searched the house and the basement, but there was no sign of forced entry into the storm room. They didn't find anyone on the property either. Their best guess was that whoever had been living down there was angry when they realized they were locked out and decided to come back and scare us. I was both furious and horrified. My wife has been a wreck ever since. The police escalated the situation since an actual crime happened and said they're working on tracking down the previous owners, but that it could take a few days. That was 2 full days ago, and we still have not been able to get in contact with them. I think the police scared away those squatters though, at least for now, as they haven't been back to our house since. I'm actually shocked that something like this could even happen in the first place. If we can't get in contact with the previous owners soon, I have absolutely no idea what I'm gonna do. I'm fully prepared to defend myself, but I hope it doesn't come to that. When I bought my first house, I was only 27. I'd saved up for years, and even though it was just a small, modest place, I was proud of it. Moving in, though, that took some adjustment. I'd lived with my parents my whole life, along with 3 siblings and 2 dogs. The house was loud, always buzzing with life. But this was quiet. Really quiet. That was honestly the hardest part about the transition. The lack of noise. Living alone felt strange, and at first, I wasn't sure I'd ever get used to it. I'm sure anyone who's gone from living with family to living alone knows what I'm talking about. One thing I loved about the house was the tiny balcony on the 2nd floor. Don't get the wrong impression. I don't even know if I can really even call it a balcony. It was barely big enough to stand on, and I couldn't even fit a chair out there. Regardless, I go out there most nights after work to take a break and clear my head. I smoked pretty often, but I hated the smell, so smoking inside wasn't an option for me. The balcony was twice as beneficial for that exact reason. I didn't even have to go outside or leave the comfort of my own home just to smoke. It felt like a luxury. I'll describe the layout of the property so what I'm about to tell you makes sense. The block I lived on was pretty standard, with houses adjacent to each other all the way down. The street behind mine was exactly the same, meaning everyone's house would be sharing a backyard if it weren't for the 10-foot-tall fences designating the property lines. From my balcony, I could see over my backyard neighbor's fence and into his yard. You could see the whole place, really. After a few weeks, I realized I'd met almost all the neighbors except him. Come to think of it, I don't think I had ever seen him, let alone have a conversation with him. The guy never waved and never came over. I never saw him in the yard or at the bedroom window. Nothing. It was like he didn't exist. If it weren't for the occasional bedroom light on at night, I would have assumed the place was deserted. I guessed that there was an old person living there since the grass looked like it hadn't been cut in years, and I never heard any sounds from their yard. After another week, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go introduce myself and at least put a face to the name. One Saturday, I walked around the block to his place, expecting to knock on the door and maybe make some small talk. But the house looked rough. Rough was an understatement. It looked completely untouched. The yard was a mess, overgrown with weeds, and the whole place looked like it had been ignored for years. The paint was chipping, some of the siding had been scratched off, and the walkway was stained. The doorbell was broken, so I gave a few loud knocks and waited. Nothing. I felt awkward standing there and started to wonder if maybe the place really was vacant. But then I saw a slight movement behind the window shade. Just a flicker, like someone was peeking out. That was enough for me. Someone was in there, spying on me, but wouldn't open the door for some reason. I turned to leave, when all of a sudden, the door flew open, slamming against the wall like someone had ripped it open in a violent rage. I jumped back, totally thrown off. I whipped around and found myself face to face with an elderly Asian woman standing in the doorway, staring at me. She was short, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her skin was wrinkled, but somehow tense, like she was flexing her face muscles, if that even makes sense. Her eyes were wide, unsettlingly wide. I can't even lie, I was pretty freaked out just looking at her. There was something off about her, like it looked like she was on something. She didn't say a word, just stared with no expression on her face. Eventually, I cleared my throat and introduced myself as her new neighbor. After a few seconds, she said her name was Priscilla and gave me a half smile. And that was it. She didn't even ask my name, she just stood there, watching me. I nodded and turned away, not knowing what to say. I left feeling more unnerved than I wanted to admit. I never heard the door close behind me, but I didn't want to turn around and get caught looking. Later that night, I went out to my balcony like usual, trying to forget about the strange interaction. At that point, I had no idea of the ordeal that I had just gotten myself into. When I glanced over the railing, there she was, that crazy-looking lady from earlier, standing dead center in her yard, looking straight up at my house. She didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there staring. It was one of those moments where you wonder if you're actually seeing what you think you're seeing. I didn't know if I should say something, wave, or pretend like I hadn't noticed her. It was one of the freakiest things I'd ever seen, and I didn't know how to handle it. I went back inside and told myself she was just a little messed up in the head, and that I shouldn't be getting worked up over a harmless old lady. But it didn't stop there. The following night, I saw her again, but this time, She was moving from one window to another inside her house, watching me from each one. Although I pretended not to notice her, part of me felt like she knew that I knew she was watching. I was hoping she'd stop, but she didn't. She was still looking at me when I finished smoking and turned to go inside. Out of curiosity, I peeked out one of my windows about 20 minutes later to see if she was still looking at my house. To my horror, she actually was. I called my dad, and he told me that she probably had dementia or something, and that she was most likely just lonely or confused. He told me that I should actually feel bad for her. It was kind of hard to feel bad for someone who was borderline stalking me, but my dad calmed my nerves and assured me that she was harmless. A few nights passed without anything weird happening. I didn't see her in her yard or at any of her windows. I thought maybe my dad had been right, and was starting to feel glad that I hadn't done something drastic. That is, until one morning, when I found a woman's sock on my side of the fence, just sitting in my yard. I stared at it, feeling a chill run through me. This wasn't just her strange behavior anymore. She'd been on my property. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to confront her, but I was starting to feel like I couldn't ignore it either. I should have called the police right there, but I didn't because I didn't want to create issues with a neighbor. That night, as I was laying in bed, the doorbell started ringing. Not once, not twice, at least a dozen times, one right after the other. I didn't even need to look. I knew it was her. In my tired haze, I wasn't thinking clearly. I was more annoyed than scared. I got up, threw on a shirt, and went to the door, telling myself I'd just ask her to leave me alone. I told myself that I'd been putting this off for long enough, and it was about time I dealt with it. I have no idea why I wasn't scared in that moment. I still look back and cringe at how flippantly I handled the situation. I don't even want to say I was naive, but I can't think of a better word to describe my attitude to it all. The second I opened the door, she lunged at me. She ran full speed at me with a kitchen knife in her hand, her face twisted in rage. She started screaming, yelling something about how I had taken her son from her. I barely had time to process what was happening. I grabbed her arm, managing to wrestle the knife out of her grip, and I pinned her down on the floor. She was easy to overpower, but that didn't make the situation any less terrifying. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking as I held her there and called the police. She was still screaming nonsense about her son and told me that she was going to kill me. At one point she tried to bite me, but I wasn't going to let her go until the police arrived. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. She never stopped screaming or squirming the entire time. When the police finally arrived, they restrained her and forced her into one of their cruisers. She screamed the whole time, and I could still hear her screaming even after they shoved her in the car. I had never been more scared in my life. The police made sure I was okay and told me she'd be sent to some kind of psychiatric facility. I never saw her again after that. This incident still weighs pretty heavily on my mind and has definitely made me a more paranoid and cautious person. I ended up moving out not even a year later.
Terror at my new home. Last year, my wife and I moved into our new house in Louisiana. Before sealing a deal, a neighbor nearby warned me about all the strange things that happen here. She genuinely believes that the house is cursed and anyone who lives there will suffer terrible misfortune, as its former owners. At first, I didn't think much of them. They were just about rumors. It was just an old house, barely outside the city. And as a boy who grew up in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming, I didn't think this place could be that bad. Besides, my wife were usually home with me on weeknights and the whole weekend. However, the story I'm about to tell you took place on a rare occasion that my wife wasn't at home with me. She was out drinking with a friend from high school who happened to live in the same town as us. So, that's how I ended up being home alone. The house felt too quiet and large, and since I had never spent the night alone, I naturally felt a bit uneasy. But I'm not type scared easily. After locking all the doors and double-checking all the windows that were closed, I pushed the uncomfortable feeling aside and settled in to watch my favorite show. About 15 minutes into what seemed like a normal night, I noticed a suspicious man across the street. When my husband and I moved in, we installed 2 street lamps in our front yard to make sure the whole area was properly lit up. That's why, when I sat in my living room to looking out, I had a clear view of everything outside, including the man walking up our driveway and looking in. The first time I ignored him, thinking he was just a curious local checking out our new neighbors. The second time he passed by, I felt a bit more anxious, but still chose not to do anything about it. But when I saw him walk by the third time, staring directly at me and my home, I knew something was off. Having lived in rural areas my whole life, I knew that most people around here were sweet older couples or middle-aged families. However, I also knew that every once in a while, you could run up into a real weirdo. The countryside was always a good place to live a low life, and unfortunately, it's a place for some less savory individuals like sex offenders, drug addicts, or even serial killers, who came here to hide, staying off the radar of both the police and the people in general. My husband and I were well aware of that, so we armed ourselves with a hunting rifle, and of course, we both know how to use it. After loading the rifle and placing it within reach, I went back to watching my show while keeping an eye on the man outside. If he acted up, I could call my husband to come home, and in the worst case scenario, I might have used the gun to actually shoot someone. After a while, I stood up from the couch and walked to the window to check my surroundings. I pulled the curtain back just a crack and peeked out. I saw nothing at first, just a green lawn stretching out to the road. But then, my eyes caught movement. There he was, standing near the old shed at the edge of my property. The guy had to be up something. I could feel it deep in my gut. I dropped the curtain, grabbed my phone, and dialed my husband right away, but it went straight to voicemail. He was probably still at the bar and didn't pick up as his phone was drowned out by the noise. I called my husband again while standing by the window to take another look at the suspicious man. However, he was nowhere to be found. By then, the wind had earlier rustled my window had died down, leaving the house completely silent. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock on the front door. I rushed for the rifle, gripping it tightly as I approached the door. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I peered through the peephole, and my worst fear came to life. It was the same stranger who had been showing up at the house unannounced, time and time again. With my husband still not answering his phone, I decided to call 911. Just as I gave the operator my home address, I heard the back door click open. The man had just broken into my house, leaving me no choice but to escape through the front door. But that's when I heard rustling footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw that our shed, which we don't even use, had a side door wide open. The whole situation left me feeling confused, and I felt like a mouse being toyed by a cat. Despite my fear, I advanced toward the shed, screaming at the man to show himself with a rifle in hand. I was ready to shoot anything inside if I had to. As I moved closer to the shed, I started hearing noises inside, almost like somebody was moving around stuff. Suddenly, the light in my yard went out, catching me by surprise. But I was quick to turn on the flashlight attached to my rifle. With the light gone, I felt even more vulnerable, but it confirmed one thing. There were two intruders on my property. I stood a few yards away from the shed, didn't say anything, just waiting for him to come out. But something got hold of me inside. I couldn't hold back. I was scared but also pissed off that these men got toyed me for my whole evening. My husband and I lived here for 6 months without any problems, but now with him gone, these men really thought I was an easy target. This made me genuinely infuriated. I wasn't going to let them go away with this. I slowly but surely made my way to the door, and when the shed was just a few feet away, I peered through the dusty window. The moment I did, the noise inside stopped. He must have heard me or noticed me somehow. I wanted to turn on the light, but of course, the light bulb was out because it wasn't turning on. When I was about 10 feet from the shed, things went from the horrible to much, much worse. Out of nowhere, the shed door swung open, and a man came charging towards me. I stepped back, and I couldn't believe it, but I accidentally pulled the trigger. I stood still in disbelief. I didn't hit him, but I'm saying it didn't even seem to scare him. He continued approaching me, but at a slower pace. The man was tall but skinny. He was dressed in all black, wearing a mask. We were staring at each other. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw another man stepped out, and I fired my rifle again. The bullet did not hit him, but only in the dirt. But that was enough to stop him in his tracks. I then pointed a gun at both of them. I was terrified, tried to keep my best to keep my cool, and told them to leave, or that I was going to kill both of them. "Do it then, you won't kill me, you're a coward," he said, then proceeded to call me every name in the book. That's when the police sirens came about in the distance. The intruders knew they were done for. I dropped my rifle as the two men tried to run, with 2 officers chasing right after them. The police caught them, and later they went straight to jail. After that incident, my husband and I worried that they were going to come back. We have a restraining order on him, but obviously there's really nothing stopping him from coming back if he really wanted to. When he gets out of jail, or that is, or maybe he's already out of jail, I don't know. All I know is that he comes back, he won't be nice. My husband and I are trying to move, but it's a lot easier than done, so we're going to hang tight for a while. The creep at my door. It was Friday night, and I had just finished my shift at the downtown bakery. I'd moved to this quiet little town only a few months ago, and rented a small house at the end of a gravel road, about 10 minutes from the town square. The town wasn't much, just a few shops and a diner, and a long row of houses that sat on the edge of the open cornfields. After locking up the store, I started the walk home. The streets were empty, with not a soul in sight. If it weren't for the flickering glow of the old street's lights overhead, the short walk might have been much scarier. I got home around 10 p.m. and everything seemed normal. At the time, I was still new to the town, with no friends, so I live alone in a 2-bedroom house. I walked up to the front door and went inside. After getting, my plans was to change and make something to eat. I had only made it halfway to bedroom when I heard doorknob turning on my front door. I stopped where I was and suddenly had a bad feeling. Obviously, I wasn't expecting anybody to come over. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagine it. There was no way someone could be at my door this late, but the sound was unmistakable. The rattle of the knob, like someone was trying to open the door. I turned around, and whoever was there started knocking at my front door. I felt kind of suspicious, but still walked inside, over to see and who was outside. When the front door was within my view, I carefully looked out the window. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't anyone from the town, at least not anyone I had ever seen. I was home alone, and as a young woman, I didn't want to answer, but he kept knocking. Then I heard him yell something. The strange man scared me, but I tried to reassure myself that he might be just at the wrong house. I thought about answering his knocks, but the way he aggressively banged the door made me hesitate and ultimately decided not to. I stayed there, just a few feet away, hoping that he would leave. He demanded to let me inside. Then suddenly he called my name. My stomach dropped. How did he know my name? I had never seen him before, not at work, not in any of the places I've been around in town. I tried to think if I'd forgetting meeting him somewhere, but nothing came in mind. There was no way he'd have shown who I was or where I lived. "I know you're in there. Open the door," the man shouted, and I decided I had enough of this bullshit. I yelled from the other side as loud as I could. I was calling the police if he didn't leave right now. However, that didn't seem to have much of an effect. He stayed there and kept banging on my front door. I noticed his car was parked in my driveway, headlights still on, with the driver's side door hanging open, as if he'd rushed to my doorstep. I was certain now, whoever this man was, he wasn't in his right mind. I got out my phone to call the police and dialed as quickly as I could. My heart was racing as I told the 911 operator the situation. My biggest fear was the man would try to break in somehow and get into my house. I was all alone. I could not fight him. Toward the end of my conversation on the phone, the man stopped, and I noticed him running back to his car. Then he got and drove away. I watched closely and made sure that his car left my street. I feel a bit better and told the 911 operator to this new information. They sent an officer out anyway so I could tell them what happened. After that, the guy was still gone. After looking around a little bit and talking to me, the officer left as well. It was a little scary being home by myself that night. I had a difficult time trying to go to sleep, but eventually I was able to. I woke up the next morning at about 7 a.m. At first, I had forgotten about the craziness of the night before. I made my way to the kitchen and passed by the window. I happened to notice a car parked right out front my driveway. It was the same car as the night before. The guy was back, and noticed he appeared to be inside of it. I didn't hesitate and called the police immediately. I told them that the man had returned. Then I carefully watched out the window for a couple of minutes. The man remained inside. I watched him open his door and leave the vehicle. He made his way up to my front door. Then he started knocking. I couldn't believe the audacity of this guy. Still didn't know who he was or what he wanted. I didn't know who he was. He stayed at my door, knocking every often. I went back to the house. After a few minutes, the police got here. When they did, the man tried running away. He wasn't able to make it that far, though, as was caused by the police. When he was questioned, he didn't even reveal how he knew my name, or what his reasoning was. All he would say that he just wanted to talk to me. He claimed that we were old friends, which was not true at all. I'm just glad that I noticed him that morning. I think he followed me from work that night before, and I simply hadn't realized it when I walked in my front door. The scariest part that still haunts me is that the thought he might have been stalking me for a while before finally showing up my door. The unsettling experience has made me more cautious in public, as you never know when or where you might become someone's target. Something sinister was at my doorstep. At 32, after years of living in the city, I finally decided to return to my hometown in the countryside. After saving enough money, I bought a charming single-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by open fields and bordered by a dense forest. The peace and fresh air were exactly what I needed after the stress of city life. After arriving, I spent my first day unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. The house was new and cozy, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. It was fully equipped with everything I needed, and I was mostly happy with it, except for one thing: the isolation. My only neighbor lived across the street, and beyond that, there were no other houses for miles. At times, it felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. By late afternoon, I had unpacked most of my things and decided to head into town for groceries. The local market was small but well stocked. The cashier asked if I was new in town, and I mentioned I had just moved in. She smiled, but when I told her where I lived, her expression turned odd, as if something about the location unsettled her. "That's right, by the old forest, isn't it?" she asked. I nodded, a bit puzzled by her reaction. "Just be careful out there, it gets pretty quiet at night," she added with a polite but uneasy smile. I brushed off the comment, attributing it to small town superstition or just typical concern for someone living alone. I loaded up on groceries and a few bottles of wine, then I drove back to my house. That evening, after a small dinner, I decided to relax in my living room with a glass of wine. I lit a few candles, put on some music, and snuggled up on the couch with a book. Being home alone felt a little lonely, but it had its own advantages, so I could do whatever I pleased without any interruption. It was around 10 p.m. at this point, and I was tired of reading my book and go to my bed. I suddenly heard something outside. Something was walking in the grass near my home. This sounded eerily close, likely only standing behind my living room to the front yard, but I got a little bit nervous, so I went to grab a baseball bat nearby before I got up and looked into the window. It wasn't until that I realized how dark it had gotten outside. I looked around, seeing nothing but large trees everywhere and pitch black darkness around them. I turned on the outdoor lights and looked out to my porch again, but saw no one. I strained to listen, hoping to catch any sound. The forest was eerily calm and quiet, and with the music off, I know I would have heard footsteps if someone was still moving around. However, after a few tense moments of waiting, the silence remained unbroken. I felt slightly relieved as the sound was gone, but still decided to leave the porch light on, just in case. Then I pulled the curtain down and finally decided to call it a night. That night, I lit up the fireplace and slept right in the living room instead of going to bed. The sleep came to me easily after the whole day of moving and unpacking. However, after what felt like 10 minutes of sleeping, I heard those footsteps again. This time, it came quickly after them. It was a singular door knock. I was immediately awake and alert, grabbing my bat. I went to the front door and took a peek outside. That's when I realized the light outside was out. Even though it had been just a little while earlier, it was utterly dark outside, so I couldn't see anything. Then I was peering hard through the peephole. Another knock echoed. I flinched and took a few steps away from the door. "Hello?" someone called out from the other side, their voice raspy but high-pitched. I guess it belonged to an old woman, but I wasn't entirely sure. The whole situation felt off to me, so I decided to give out no response. This person wandered on my property earlier, but only now that they come to my doorsteps. Hence, the way they knocked on my door was deeply unsettling. One deliberately knocked only. Nobody knocks like that. Whoever person this was, I was sure they had no good intention. "Hello?" There's the same voice again. "Hello? Do you want some apple pie?" My heart pounded as the weird question echoed through the door. Whoever was out there, I was now certain, had to be unhinged. There was no way I would respond or even think about opening the door for them. Taking a deep breath, I quietly retreated to the couch, hoping they would leave like before. But as I just settled down, I heard another noise, a dull thump, like something heavy landing on a roof. My blood ran cold, and I grabbed my phone to call 911. While I waited for someone to pick up, I heard more footsteps coming from the roof. They were slow, deliberate, and kept facing back and forth. Finally, someone on the other end answered, and I explained the situation and gave them my address. The dispatcher reassured me that officers were on the way, but it would take time for them to get to my remote location. I stayed on the line, barely able to breathe, as the footsteps continued. After felt like an eternity, there was a heavy thud as something or someone jumped down from the roof. I heard the sound of boots crunching on gravel, then a slow, measured footsteps as they walked around the side of the house. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst. I moved quietly to the front window, peeking on just in time to see a shadowy figure slipping away into the darkness of the forest beyond my yard. A few minutes later, the police arrived. They searched the property, but found no signs of no one. The officers took my statement and assured me they would keep a patrol car nearby for the night. Despite their effort to reassure me, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, waiting for me to be alone. The rest of the weekend passed uneventfully, though I slept fitfully, jumping at every creak and groan in the cold house. On Sunday evening, I packed a bag and decided to spend the night at a nearby bed and breakfast. My nerves were too frayed to stay at the house alone. I would figure out what to do next in the morning, but one thing was certain. The peaceful solitude I had been looking for had turned into a terrifying ordeal. Whatever had been on my roof last night was still out there, lurking in the shadows of a quiet countryside. I was grateful I had left before they decided to come back.